So back when I was younger, right after high school, a bunch of my friends and I went on a camping trip to Algonquin Park. It was the perfect vacation for a bunch of guys who really didn't have any money. Most of us were students, except for me, of course. I was just a bum. And so we would borrow some gear from my dad, a canoe from Dave's uncle, and Greg's dad always gave us the car. It was a 1972 Chrysler Town and Country station wagon. It had a fake wood paneling on the sides. It was always a nice temperature inside the car. Didn't matter what the temperature was like outside or how long it had been sitting. It was never hot in the summer. It was never cold in the winter. It had no dashboard light. So if you were driving up at night, you couldn't tell how fast you were going. And we were always driving up at night because we were a bunch of young hooligans. And we were always waiting on someone, named Dave usually. We called the car the Anti-Chrysler. So we did this trip a bunch. It became a tradition. And eventually, after I'd gotten a job, we decided, hey, you know what? Why don't we rent a second car and make the trip easier? The other good thing about that is we could change the type of trip that we did. Normally, we would go in at one point and then travel around a bunch of lakes and come out at the same area. But with two cars, we could leave one at the beginning and one at the end, and we could travel across the park. We just have to shuttle the cars back and forth. So we figured this is going to be easy. What we'll do is we'll drive up, we'll camp in the parking lot the first night, and then we'll shuttle the cars, come back, sleep, start canoeing. Entirely my fault. I never looked at a map showing us which highways we were going to have to take in order to get to the exit. We had to go all the way to North Bay before we could turn east. It was 3 hours before we hit the entrance to the park. That road was a 40-kilometer dirt road that was so rough and had no lights on it that we were forced to take it. We took about 2 hours. So 5 hours of driving just to drop the car off. We stopped long enough, pulled out a camp stove, brewed up some coffee, headed back. When we got back, the sun was already up, and so were most of our friends, except for Dave. We basically only had time to pack up our gear, have some breakfast, and then start paddling with no sleep. It wasn't bad though, because you're camping, and when you're camping, everything is good, even when it's not. And we got a wonderful tailwind that day. We pulled up my tarp and used it as a sail and just let it carry us the whole way. At one point, we were able to stop and catch some fresh brook trout and have that for dinner. And throughout the whole week, because we were traveling from one place to another, we got to see the different types of geography of the park. We started out where the lakes were up in the highlands, and then that turned into rivers, and then eventually rivers in valleys with waterfalls and log jams from the historic logging in the park. And when we got out on that last day, we're standing there on the shore of Cedar Lake, I believe, and we were exhausted with that sort of tired feeling that you know you've achieved something, you have this camaraderie that you've earned. Everyone had earned it, even Dave. And we were happy until we saw the Anti-Chrysler. Because we knew we had another 10 hours of driving before we could pack the car. And Greg and I just said, fuck that, we're not doing that. So we took our paddles, we lashed them to the roof racks, making them extra wide. So we could fit two canoes side by side. Then we stacked the third one on top of those in a pyramid fashion. 2 guys got in the front, 3 guys got in the back. I climbed into the trunk with all of the gear, and we started driving down this dirt road. That took us 2 hours with an empty car. It took us a lot longer with a full car because we didn't have any suspension left. The car was bottomed out all the way, and the engine was not quite powerful enough to get us up the bigger hills. So we would all pile out, walk up the hill, and wait for Greg to catch up to us in the car. After about 2 hours of this, we got to the ranger station, which is halfway on this road. It's where the road forks off and goes to a different lake. We got out, checked in with the ranger station, told them that we were safe, so to speak. And just as we were about to get back into the car, I run into a couple that I know. It's a German exchange student couple. And they were really, really nice, and they offered to allow 3 of the smelliest human beings you've ever seen in your entire life get into the back of their car, and they drove us out to the highway, which saved about 500 pounds of weight from the Anti-Chrysler. and made that trip easier. I don't know how long I waited by the side of the highway, but I do know that it was 15 minutes from the time that I first heard the Anti-Chrysler to the time that I saw it. It was so incredibly loud. It pulled around the corner, and it looked exactly as it did when I left it, only now there was a tailpipe strapped to the side of the canoes. At some point, Greg had hit something, tore the tailpipe right off the car, and now I know how loud engines get and why we put mufflers on them. So we hop into the car, we start driving down the highway. It's not so bad because it's smooth and the suspension doesn't matter. But we have all the windows down because we're afraid that carbon monoxide is going to start building up inside the car without a tailpipe. And that makes the engine sound even worse. In order to have a conversation with the person next to you,
you have to talk to them like this, which you can't do for 2 hours.
So you sit in quiet, so to speak, because there's nothing quiet about it. Eventually we got to a convenience store on a highway up that I don't even know, in a town so small I probably wouldn't have noticed it. But convenience stores, when you're coming out of the bush, is the first sign of civilization. You've just spent a week living out of a backpack, and now you can go into this building and give them paper and get things like chocolate or chips or a can of Coke that is cold. So we got out. Greg pulled the car around behind the back of the store because he didn't want any police cruisers going by to see it. And we went in and we got our snacks, and it was great because it was air conditioned. And when I came out, the coolest car in town was sitting in front of us. And I know it was the coolest car because everyone between the ages of 16 and 30 was standing around looking at it. It was brand new, it was a 5-liter Mustang. It had this nice paint job with racing stripes on it. And the hood was up, so all the gearheads could check out the engine, and everybody else was standing around listening to Bon Jovi come out of the speakers. And I liked it too. I was looking at it. I just spent a week looking at trees and animals, and now I'm seeing industry, human achievement. This was really neat, until I heard the sound. And everybody's head turned. We looked to the side of the convenience store, and we see this 20-year-old station wagon with 3 canoes on the roof, slowly creep out from the side. And then 5 yahoos in the parking lot climb into it like it's some kind of reverse clown car. And we take off down the highway. And as we drove away, I was watching the people because I was facing backwards in the trunk of the car. And the entire time that I could see them, they were still staring at us. Because for that brief moment, we had the most dangerous car in town. And it's moments like that that make all the hardship of going on trips like that worthwhile. Thank you.